so much to be grateful for. I would like to first of all thank Annette and Ron Schmidt for having me in their home while I'm here, welcoming me in and showing me a good time and giving me a place to alight during this journey. Thank you very, very much. And of course to thank Linda Russell, who is wonderful, and also to thank Leslie Takahashi for inviting me to come and speak with you today, inviting me back. Just let me come back. But really, I'm grateful for it because it was a little unexpected, and I hadn't actually planned my summer around it. And I'll be telling you a little bit more about how this whole thing and the business of me being here to talk to you about equity at church came about. But before I get into that, and I'll try and keep it brief. I'm looking at the time and realizing, oh, man, we've been having a good time here. First, a quote from the Bible, 1 Thessalonians 4, chapter 4, verses 16 through 17. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel and the sound of the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord. From Matthew 24, verses 29 through 31. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. And you're now asking why. You're like, wait a minute. Oh, this isn't what I bargained for. So, those of you who may have grown up in certain Christian traditions will probably be familiar with those passages in that they relate to something called the rapture. The rapture, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the rapture, just in very, very broad and general terms, and I probably will get it wrong, so forgive me, is the time at the end of days when Jesus Christ returns to the world. He is risen again, and he calls forth those who have been good, have followed the ways of the Bible, and he calls them up into heaven. Those who have already died, who also were good, will also join him and rise up. There will be a great coming together of the faithful at that time. And the reason I bring this up is not because I'm trying to convert you. That is not the goal here. Well, not that way. I'm not trying to convert you that way. But because the folks who believe in the rapture, I don't want to denigrate anybody's beliefs. I don't want to diminish what that means for someone. In fact, I actually want to hold up what that means. The folks who believe in the rapture, it is the framework for life. It is the reason why. It is the ultimate goal. It is the complete commitment of their spiritual journey. And frankly, I think that that's kind of cool, to be able to look at something and say, I commit myself wholly, my whole self, my whole being, to X, Y, or Z. I'm a firm believer in commitment. And I have to turn that around a little bit and ask myself sometimes, what are we as Unitarian Universalists committed to? And how deeply? We tend to make fun of things like the rapture sometimes. We make fun of, and not in horrible ways always, but sometimes we a little rib there at the idea of being risen up and joining your Lord in heaven seems a little far-fetched to some of us. But to those who believe, it is comforting, it is grounding, and it allows them to take every step with absolute assurance in the world, knowing that they are, at every moment in time, working toward this beautiful goal of reconciliation with their Lord. And I actually think that that's a good lesson. Somewhere in there is a good lesson for us. Imagine just for a moment, if we translated this whole rapture thing into our beliefs and commitments around social justice. Every step we take is committed to social justice. Every step we take, every breath we take is committed to just and fair inclusion. What would that actually be like? And I ask, and I follow up this question, we're wondering, how can we be ready? And if we're not ready now for that world that we're working for, how are we going to be ready down the line? So I came here today not to talk to you at length about the rapture, though I already have. I'm looking at my time. But to talk to you about equity. So when we're talking about equity, I'm really happy that I got to do that sort of children's story for you this morning. I actually stole it from Angela Glover Blackwell. She was my boss while I was still living in Oakland. I worked for PolicyLink and learned a lot from her. And she often tells the story about the sidewalk cutouts and how they came about. And I think it's actually a perfect way to tell children because it's something they see. It's down there. It's on their level. Something they see. So it's about just and fair inclusion for all. Equity is not equality. It's not giving everybody the same thing. We all need something different to be whole. We're individuals, and we, Unitarian Universalists, of course, respect the individual. But what unites us is how the different stuff is what we actually need to be together. It can get a little foggy there. But I love this idea of framing our work and connecting it to our spirituality as something that it's absolute. It's the thing we have to do, is looking for those opportunities to acknowledge all of the differences and the different ways that we need to be supported in order to achieve this thing called equity. A great big word that a lot of policy people use. And so I embarked a couple of months ago now on something called the California Equity Ministry. And it's an effort, an initiative to try and bring people around to this sort of thinking. See, I am trying to convert you after all. To bring folks around to this thinking of being able to acknowledge our differences, to be able to look at those square in the eye and say, okay, you need something different in order to have the opportunities that I have. I might need less, I might need more, etc. But that's what keeps us in relationship with each other. And in doing this work, what I've discovered is the most challenging thing for us as Unitarian Universalists, and even outside of our denomination, the most challenging thing for us to actually engage race, class, and culture. Those three elements. Why is it so hard for us to engage race, class, and culture? There are many reasons. That is a whole separate sermon in itself. The important thing is we have the opportunity to actually look this stuff square in the eye. Instead of immediately leaping to the place of post-racial, post-classism, post-cultural, where we're all this great big melange of vagueness. We actually have the opportunity right now, with a lot of what is happening in the world, to look at each other in our wholeness, in all of our differences, our faults, our foibles, our different ways of being in the world, and say, I see you. I see you. I acknowledge you, and I might even go so far as to love you. But you can't do that until you actually see each other. I had an amazing experience a few weeks ago, and this is probably where the idea of talking about the rapture came in. I was away at something called the Wild Goose Festival. Wild Goose, it is a festival, it's largely a Christian event. It's about 1,000 folks gathered in the woods of North Carolina, being spiritual, praising Jesus, chanting, all kinds of things like that. We camp, so it's all tents. And the most remarkable thing, I am sitting there in, the woods, listening to the evangelical, actually technically Presbyterian, but evangelical pastor Tracy Blackman preach about the connections between Jesus and being transgender. Yeah. I'm like, okay, perfect connection. And in her sermon, she talked about how she had to actually see transgender folks before she could get there. She hadn't actually been seeing them. Another gentleman, a very, very famous father, Tony Campolo, who has recently been horribly ostracized by evangelicals because he said, get this, I love this one. He said, I've been married for 60 years. And speaking to his transformation in terms of marriage equality, he said, I would never want to deny someone the beauty of what I've been able to experience in my marriage. Who am I to do that? And so he's all for marriage equality at this point. But he had to see the people first. These are examples that I see of equity in action. Someone actually, waking up and seeing the other people, committing to seeing them, and then being able to act on it. Tony Campolo usually has about 300, not 3,000, 300 speaking engagements in a year, and he told us that they are now down to 30. But he is not going to change his stance, because this is what guides him spiritually. He is fully, fully committed. That, to me, is equity in action. So what I'm bringing to you today in asking you about equity, I'm asking you to make a commitment. I'm asking you to consider what it would be like to be committed to actually seeing people in their wholeness in terms of race, class, and culture, recognizing that different people need different things to all have the same opportunities. Something that I realized in some of the outreach I've been doing so far is that there's a formula. Not that life is formulaic in any way whatsoever, but there's a simple formula that you can follow that will help you get there. And that is to commit to doing the internal work, to doing the external work, and to doing the spiritual work. And when I say internal work, I'm talking about looking inward first, asking yourself, where do I come from? What are the identities that I hold? What are the intersections within me that I want others to see? Internal work, sometimes challenging, sometimes very difficult to look in the mirror and say, I have a lot of privilege, but not with guilt. I'm not asking you to carry that with guilt. I'm asking you to carry this with the simple affirmation, this is the way it may be. I am who I am. And that allows you to then see others. The external work is where the other folks come in. Once you can see yourself fully, step outside of the walls of the church, bring that full self into community with those who you may not have seen before. Go to that meeting. Go to that gathering. Go to that march. Go to that walk. And invite people in as well. If there are folks that you don't see in the pews next to you, get to know some and bring them here. That's the external work, the external action. The spiritual work is then tying it back down to what we believe as Unitarian Universalists, that we all deserve an opportunity for just and fair inclusion. That is the kind of commitment that can carry us forward. That is something that can allow us to step forward with confidence every step we take, believing and knowing that we've been able and open to do the internal work, able and open to do the external work, and then beautifully able to wrap it around with Unitarian Universalism. That, to me, is equity. I think that could be a pretty cool formula for us all. So, really, that's pretty much all I've got for you today. I'm asking you to commit to this. I'm asking you to consider at least committing to it. I'm not asking you to be raptured today or tomorrow. But if that is your journey, well then, good on you. But look for those opportunities to stretch yourself, to commit to your beliefs, to commit to one another, and to commit to this world that we want to see someday. And remember that the only way that we can authentically be in relationship with others is if we're first in authentic relationship with ourselves. I believe that our spiritual mandate is based in religious freedom, and it says that as UUs, we meet each other with justice, equity, and compassion, and that this is the beginning. Hopefully, it will lead us to the ultimate day where we can all share equitably in a world of peace. May it be so.